Welcome back, everybody. This is the AIX Higher Ed Podcast, and we're here the latter end of November to talk a little bit about some updates with Gemini 3 and Nano Banana.
Many have described this as kind of a step change. There's clearly just kind of an acceleration of what the models can do, but this seems a lot more, especially with the integration of the reasoning, the visualization, the images that we'll discuss. I heard it, on the I heard on the Moonshots podcast, they were talking about, oh, how models have a smell, and that, this is kind of a new smell. So we're also kind of operating at the level of intuition. But today we'll briefly review, some of the new abilities that the model has. Spend a lot of time on the actual applications because, that's really where people's interest is. And we'll talk about kind of the growing credibility of Google in AI and how they're putting a lot of pressure on the competition.
I was glad Stefan included this because from 2017, this old post talking about the emojis that were created by Apple and Google and the placement of the cheese on the burger. And notice on the Apple one, the cheese is on top of the burger, and on Google, it was underneath.
And so I think Sundar, the CEO of Google, that must have really got under his skin back in 2017 because I guess they made a joke at the time that they were working on it. But when they released the model, I think it was last Tuesday when they released Gemini 3, he shared this, and it's something we'll see throughout. It's really multimodal in terms of the text. The integration of the text and the imaging and the reasoning and, just kind of the explanation of where everything goes on the hamburger. So as I get older, I find different things that are a bit idiosyncratic sometimes that drive me. And maybe the hamburger drove the release of Gemini 3.
And we're going to see a lot more visuals like this. This kind of visualization is something that this model is far more capable of producing. And Stefan has some great examples of that coming up.
And here's just kind of the brief overview. Everybody talks about the benchmarks, and they say they can game the benchmarks, not in an illegitimate way, but just kind of focusing the training on some of the benchmarks. But I don't want to discuss all the benchmarks. We could see some of the popular benchmarks. This Humanities Last Exam, which has these super sophisticated problems, it scored at what is a 48.8%, right, on Humanities Last Exam. That's incredible, and it's getting really high scores without using tools, which means it's not going out on the web and doing any research before it completes the answers. We can see high scores on math, on PhD knowledge. If you're using these models, and I encourage you to use Gemini 3, you'll just really start getting an idea of how much it knows. I think already kind of, at least in content wise, certainly knowing more than the average person.
The other thing I heard from an analyst about this is that it's been quite a while since we've had a model that was the clear front runner. And that's really the case with Gemini 3, certainly across the benchmarks in terms of other capabilities. This is really distinct. We've had a horse race where everybody, models will come out a little bit ahead on one area, maybe not quite ahead on another, but Gemini 3 tends to be across the board, really the front runner and the best model out there at the current time.
There's a number of applications that we want to talk about. I think one of the biggest ones for educators is, Google has integrated the AI into the search. And we saw the AI overviews, which have billions of uses, but we know that they're not really, they're not really that reliable. And I don't think, they're good to just click on the links and do some other things. But now they're integrating this into search itself. If you click on AI mode, you can get some things, and it's available right now. If you have the Google Pro subscription, which is $20 a month, or the Ultra, few people have that. But the Pro is kind of the equivalent to the $20 a month ChatGPT. It kind of is right in there, and it's fully integrated, with Google Search. And I'm sure it'll probably just come into the main search as well. So when we're thinking about telling students not to use AI. There's AI kind of right in Google, which we kind of basically encourage our students to use with almost every assignment.
And one thing that's remarkable about what Google has done with this is that they're really expanding it farther than most anticipated. This has to use a great deal of compute. Now, they're obviously working on different kinds of efficiencies to make sure they can maintain that and meet that level of demand, but they're expanding it really very rapidly. Far more people have access to it than most would anticipate for a brand new pro model like this. And so they obviously have been planning for this, and I think they're going to continue to ramp it up.
And one of the things I found kind of, very interesting, I just kind of discovered this by accident. I was doing some other searches, and I found that it, very like when it would use equations and stuff, the equations would be really clear, and then they would integrate images. So I just, did a simple one that, anybody watching could relate to, and asked it to describe photosynthesis. And you see, it's not just text, right? Like we've had text kind of explanations of a lot of things, but it's kind of bolding key concepts and kind of kind of a formulaic, type approach to kind of the explanation. Then it pulls images from Getty Images and inserts them right there. And if I remember correctly, they have some kind of relationship with Getty Images that allows them to use the images without, kind of the copyright concerns. So it's kind of really building out. If you're a student, you just type in like, what is photosynthesis? You get a tutorial. And the other thing I've noticed is I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's how I learn a lot about this. And sometimes I take them, I copy and paste the podcast. So I also coach debate, and I can get some evidence, some quotes from the podcast that I've been listening to. And I think Gemini is the best at this. I paste the transcript, that has all the the timestamps, and it's kind of messy when you paste it out of the transcript from Google, and it formats it, and it was just formatting it by speaker, but now I know it's going on, and it's bolding like critical ideas. It's organ, making clear where the different concepts are that are being discussed in the podcast. So if you want to read podcasts or have some other use for the text like I do, this is a great tool.
Yeah, it's just really intuitive in the way that it starts preparing information. Maybe in the way that some of us were hoping for a couple of years ago with earlier tools. It's just doing it a lot better now. It has a greater facility with accessing and presenting information.
Yeah. And it's also really good, as we talked about at the beginning, at kind of generating images from an idea. So, some of you may know I put out on my Substack, I've kind of been toying with this idea of a human super intelligence center. And what I did was, and I got this idea from somebody, I forget who, on the internet. It said just, you could generate an image, from a blog post. So I took the whole post, which I think is close to 3,000 words, and I just dumped it into Gemini and, clicked on image and said, can you make me an image, that I can use to like market this center? Essentially, that's what the prompt was. And it came up with this really incredible image. I do want to say, and we'll talk about this at the end, is that I used my Workspace account, which is it kind of has like the $20 subscription in it. I did generate it like in the free one, and I didn't get as strong of an image. But this is an incredible image that really not just has the text and the images, but designed the images and kind of introduces the key concepts of the Human Intelligence Center that I described in the post.
Then there's also the ability to create applications, and doing this within Gemini, also within AI Studio, which Stefan and I both played around with and are just really floored by in terms of its capabilities. One thing to recognize is that, and maybe we'll go into a greater depth on this on another podcast, and we can show using Apple AI Studio, not Apple Studio, excuse me, AI Studio, but it really is able to integrate so many different Google searches, and different services. So you can incorporate Google Maps, or you can include YouTube or search functions. There are a lot of different things, visual creation, be able to make it kind of conversational. There are lots of things you can do with it when you're building an easy app. And we were really impressed with this, even with 2.5 and with Gemini Pro 3. It's really astonishing at how quickly it's able to develop new uses and applications within the apps, and giving you lots of ideas about what you're able to do. It's just incredibly easy to be able to develop an app, an early prototype for something that really works.
Yeah, and I just, you can see it just built a basic Space Invaders game, and there's another shot of me just playing a little bit, shooting the Space Invaders out of the sky. The other thing, the next thing I want to show, and we'll playing this here, is I took that same image, right, of the Super Intelligence Center, and I asked it to create an ad using VO3.1, which is their image, their generator you can take. You can either ask it in text form to make a video, or you can put in an image and create a video from it. And you can see the video here. It's really an impressive advertisement for the
We
center.
must shift
So
sorting to survival.
Yeah, it's really astonishing. Look how fluid that is. It has a voiceover with it. It just looks great.
Yeah, I'd say thanks, but I don't think I deserve any credit. All I did was say, please make me an ad. So, the other thing people talk about is, how it can organize information. It can organize it sequentially. And the other thing it can do, I showed in the last, kind of query I did on the Gemini, it shows how, it would pull in the Getty image. Well, here I just took a prompt, like, hey, give me an itinerary for a weekend in Tokyo. And it went through and it created the itinerary. And it's a little hard to see there, but there are actually links that you can click on and, kind of verify the information and book your hotel and all those types of things. But it also generated images, right? Using the image generation tool, Nano Banana. So it kind of gave me a little bit of a preview of what I might see, but it actually generated the images itself.
Now, when we talk about competition and how others are responding to it, and there was probably the most famous and the one that's gotten most attention has been how OpenAI has responded to this. There were a lot of researchers at other labs that were giving congratulations and publicly noting how powerful Gemini 3 is. This is a story about how Sam Altman had a memo, an internal memo that's been leaked, talking about the challenges that Google Gemini 3.0 presents in terms of the AI race, really encouraging the OpenAI employees to kind of buckle down and get ready for a war footing to be able to compete against this.
I think this is relevant, to educators kind of in a broad way, right? Because both these companies are trying to get schools and student users, right? They're giving a lot away, a lot of free accounts to college users. They're giving institutional subscriptions to schools, especially K-12 schools. On just before this came out, the day before, we saw that OpenAI was making, ChatGPT 5 available to all K-12 teachers through June of 2027, and we'll talk about that more later on another podcast. But the reason I want to highlight this now is because schools can only support so many systems, right? Like, and in terms of support, they're similar in terms of operating, so people can figure them out. The technical requirements are going to be kind of similar, but in terms of like training teachers and eventually getting students like set up on these systems and using them, it's a tremendous investment of kind of time and really capital in many different ways. And when you start saying, okay, well, if I use ChatGPT, say, okay, well, what's the future of ChatGPT? It seems like it's a pretty good bet, right? Google seems like a really good bet. Students don't necessarily have to be using the most advanced models unless they're maybe graduate students or PhD students. This can support basically K-12 through at least most undergraduate education. So, and they're both just going to keep getting better. But I think it is a choice that schools will have to make. They may make a lot of things available, but they're ultimately probably going to have to pick, one ecosystem that they really embrace.
And that's why there's such a scramble to be able to get a lot of users at this stage. I mean, I think as we know from kind of the history of ed technology, if a teacher or a school or a division has used one and you start investing a lot of time in it, you've developed materials, you've developed assignments, you're probably going to want to stick with it unless there's a real reason. There's a real impetus to stay with that one just because you already have invested a lot. And that's why, of course, Google, OpenAI, other companies are trying to get all of the teachers within a district to start using one in particular. It's going to be a real scramble over the next year or so.
Yeah, and then just finally, and we'll end on this one. It is important to understand, right? There are kind of different levels of, access to Google. There's the Google Ultra subscription, which I think is around $170 a month. I used it once. It was really good. That's equivalent to the $200 a month ChatGPT subscription, and I think like Grok is around $300 a month, and I think Perplexity has one as well. That's really kind of the top level, and very, very few people are using that, right? So if you haven't used one of those at all for any length of time, some people haven't really just seen what's kind of available at the top level, even a general model. Then there's the Gemini Pro, which I kind of explained, earlier was the $20 a month. That's the equivalent of ChatGPT. Then you can use it on your personal account, which I frequently, or I have my Gmail open, which is my personal Gmail, and I kind of go in there and I forget a little bit sometimes to switch it over to my enterprise account, which basically operates on the ChatGPT Pro. But I still get pretty good results. It's not quite where the Pro is. The one thing I've noticed too, and I work at a school where they have an enterprise. They have the Google Enterprise, and I've used that for some different things, just because sometimes I had that account open or I wanted to test it. And I will say I don't really the transcript thing, if I put the transcript in there, I only get about 30 minutes of the transcript. I ran the image generator for the intelligence center on all of these except the ultra, and there was a pretty big difference. I say my pro account produced the best. My personal account did a pretty good job, but the school account, when I tried the image, just kind of gave a pretty bland image. So, just a couple things to think about. One is a lot of people have different experiences with AI and what it can do. Most of the world is still just using free accounts, right? Most people have tried this, at least billions of people at this point, but they're using free accounts that just are not as capable is the pro accounts, and I think that's creating some problems. But second of all, it does mean you probably want to make an investment at some level in one of these systems, not necessarily all of them, right? But one of these systems, so you can kind of really experience what's out there. People say, this will probably eventually become like a utility. I remember when I was young, my parents said they would never pay for cable, and of course, now they pay for cable. Then it was like, well, we're gonna get Wi-Fi. Oh, well, okay, they came around to the Wi-Fi, right? And eventually, you probably will be spending some amount of money on these systems. So I do encourage you to experiment if you're able.
It's a pretty important point to think about access because when we are talking about this with colleagues, we're talking with students, there are important distinctions between them. And if you're in a school with a particular system that's being used, whether it's ChatGPT for educators, if it's Google, then obviously you're going to want to be using that's available to you because there are other privacy protections and FERPA compliance systems that you want to be able to make use of. And you can understand why maybe they have some of the features throttled a little bit or changed or certain guidelines or guardrails for some of those school systems. But that is also an important part of the discussion you need to have with your students and colleagues about what the other capabilities are. And we're getting to the point where the top of the line models are beyond what most of us would really ever need and what most students would really need. So it's okay for them not to have the pro or the ultra account necessarily. But when they do start thinking about more advanced applications and thinking about what they'll be able to do, and especially when, as Stefan mentioned, getting into discussions about people dismissing AI tools or talking about how they aren't useful or they're not reliable, it's important to be able to make this distinction and let them know there really are different applications. You can't just say, I've tried Google Gemini in one setting and it's the same as any other. It's not like a lot of the other tools that we've had before there, where they were fairly fungible. These are pretty distinct, and the experience is going to be pretty distinct as well. We're happy to provide some updates on some of these new developments, and as I mentioned, we'll probably plan one on AI Studio pretty soon, so we can talk a little bit about building applications and some of the other tools that are available there. It's another example of Google Gemini Pro being available through AI Studio that has seemingly different capabilities and some different interactions. If you're interested in hearing more about another platform or another tool that's out there, send us a message. You can find our email on our website or through the YouTube account, or you could just put a message on one of the episodes that you're listening to and let us know. We'd be happy to incorporate it in the future.
All right, thanks everybody. Happy
Thanks.
Thanksgiving.